Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to jump into a topic that's buzzing like crazy, but honestly still feels a bit mysterious.
Yeah, kind of like that feeling when you think you're in on the secret, but you're not sure you even got the right address.
Exactly. So today, we're going deep on Web3. Whether you're eyeing those job boards, feeling a little over Web 2.0, or just wildly curious about what's next online, this one's for you. We're cutting through the hype to really unpack what Web3 means for you, for me, and for the future of, well, the internet as we know it.
And what's wild is so many people are ready to dive headfirst into Web3, but if you really press them, they might not even be able to tell you exactly what at its core.
It's true. It's like we all got the memo about the party, but we skipped the part with the actual location. And to throw one example out there, would it surprise you to know that a huge percentage, like 80%, if you can believe it, of cloud computing hacks are now directly tied to Web3? We're going to break that down later on, I promise. Why it's happening, what it means, the whole deal.
But for now, maybe a little web history is a good place to start, right?
Yeah, let's roll back the clock a bit.
Web 1, back in the day, it was basically like a big digital library. You logged on, you read the information, pretty straightforward.
Right, like those early websites where you were lucky if they had a picture that wasn't the size of a postage stamp.
And then came Web 2, our current online playground, where things got a whole lot more interactive. Social media blew up, forums, the whole 9 yards. Suddenly we were reading A&D writing online, creating content, really interacting with each other, sometimes maybe a little too much.
Web 2, where we traded cat memes and hot takes for, well, let's be honest, maybe a little too much of our personal data along the way.
Exactly. Which brings us to the whole idea of Web 3, which really hinges on something pretty massive.
Yeah.
Ownership. Imagine a web where you're not just a user, you're an owner. This is where decentralization takes center stage, which, let's be real, is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but isn't always fully understood.
Yeah, it's not just about sticking it to big tech, is it? Although, don't get me wrong, there's a certain satisfaction to that idea.
Oh, absolutely. But it goes deeper. Think about it like this. Imagine traditional banking versus something called DeFi, Decentralized Finance.
DeFi, okay. I've heard that term thrown around too. It sounds a little intimidating, if I'm being honest.
I get it, but it doesn't have to be. It's more about options. So banks are centralized, right? They hold your money, call the shots, often throw some fees your way while they're at it. DeFi, on the other hand, uses this revolutionary technology blockchain to create a financial system that's peer-to-peer. It's about giving users like you and me way more control over our assets and how we move our money around.
Okay, hold on, because I feel like you just dropped the magic word blockchain. That seems to be the key to this whole Web3 thing, right? Can we break that down a bit? Because, to be honest, I'm still a little fuzzy on what a blockchain actually is.
Absolutely. It's actually surprisingly straightforward when you get past the jargon. Picture a massive public ledger. That's essentially what a blockchain is. Every single transaction gets recorded on this ledger. And here's the picker. Everyone on the network has a copy.
Wait, everyone? So it's not like one company holding all the cards.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so powerful. It's transparent. Everyone can see what's going on. And it's incredibly secure because it's incredibly difficult to tamper with.
So it's like this unchangeable public record, which basically makes it really, really hard for anyone to cheat the system.
Exactly. And because this ledger is spread across tons of computers or nodes, it becomes virtually impossible for any single entity to take control or manipulate the information.
Okay, that's a huge GE difference from Web 2, right? Where it's companies, the ones we were talking about, who hold all the cards. They control what we see, how our data is used, even what we're allowed to say in some cases. Yeah. It sounds like with Web 3 and this blockchain technology, the power starts to shift back to, the people actually using it. That's got to be empowering.
It is, or at least it has the potential to be. But we do need to remember that Web3 is still a work in progress. It's young. There are definitely challenges and complexities that we're going to dig into a little bit later.
Which I definitely want to get to. But first, we've got the blockchain as our foundation. But what else is in this Web3 toolbox? What else do we need to understand?
So there are these things called smart contracts, which sound way more complicated than they actually are.
Yeah, please tell me there's a way to explain this that doesn't involve me suddenly becoming a coding whiz.
Think of it like a vending machine. You put in the right amount of money, boom, it dispenses your snack, no human cashier involved.
Okay, now that's an analogy even I can get behind.
A smart contract is basically like that it's a self-executing agreement. it's written in code, and it automatically carries out the terms of the agreement when certain conditions are met. So yeah, just like that vending machine, no need for a central authority or middleman to make sure everything goes to plan.
So it cuts out that centralized control, which, if you think about it, is a pretty radical concept in itself.
It really is, and it opens up so many possibilities. We're not just talking about financial stuff here either. Imagine these able to track product from the factory floor all the way to your doorstep because the supply chain is totally transparent thanks to blockchain. Or how about voting systems that are virtually tamper-proof?
Okay, that's where this starts to get really interesting. Because remember that stat we dropped earlier? 80% of cloud computing hacks linked to Web3. How does that even work?
So here's the thing, all of this tech we're talking about, it's essentially just a tool. It's neutral. Whether it's used for good or for, less than good, that depends on the person using it. What we're seeing now is that some folks are taking advantage of the accessibility and the sheer computing power of cloud services to mine cryptocurrency or to run their own Web3 applications. Basically, they're hijacking those resources for their own benefit.
So it's almost like they're siphoning off processing power like it's digital electricity.
It's a good way to put it. And it highlights two really crucial things about this Web3 space. First, it shows you how valuable it is. And second, it really throws a spotlight on how incredibly important cybersecurity is in this new landscape. Because the bad guys are always going to try to find a way to game the system, no matter how secure we make it.
It sounds like the Wild West out there, complete with digital gold rushes and everything.
It kind of is. But before we get too sidetracked by the outlaws, we were talking about all the cool tech that makes up Web3. Let's dive into some real-world examples of how it's actually being used today, like that DeFi we mentioned earlier.
Yes. Let's talk about that. Plus, we've got to unpack these NFTs I keep hearing about. Are they really just ridiculously expensive JPEGs, or there more to it?
Don't worry, we'll definitely get to all of that. But first, let's take a closer look at what it actually means to decentralize finance. Ready for a crash course in DeFi?
Okay, so DeFi, Decentralized Finance. It definitely sounds intriguing, but I'm not going to lie. When it comes to my own money, I'm pretty much a set it and forget it kind of person. What would make someone want to completely rethink, how they bank?
I hear you. Change can be a little scary, especially when we're talking about something as important as money. But that's the cool thing about DeFi. It's not about throwing everything out the window. It's really more about expanding your options, having more control. So imagine a world where you don't need a traditional bank to access financial services at all.
Okay, now you've got my attention. No more waiting for the bank to open or trying to decipher those crazy fees. I'm listening.
Exactly. With DeFi, you can do things like lend and borrow money directly from other people. You can trade cryptocurrencies without needing a big centralized exchange. You can even earn interest on your crypto assets. And all of this happens on platforms that are built on blockchain technology.
So it's kind of like peer-to-peer lending, but, for the digital age, it sounds a lot more direct.
It is. It's about cutting out those middlemen and giving individuals more control over their finances. And because it's all built on the blockchain, it's designed to be transparent, secure, and accessible to anyone, anywhere with an internet connection.
That's a pretty powerful idea, especially for people who maybe don't have access to those traditional banking systems.
It is. Of course, with anything new, there are always risks and challenges to consider, but the potential here is really exciting, especially when you think about creating a financial system that's more inclusive and equitable.
Okay, DeFi, check. Now, let's talk about these NFTs, because they're everywhere these days, from digital art to virtual sneakers to I'm not even sure what else. Break it down for me. What's the deal with NFTs? What makes them so different from just, saving a cool image on my phone?
You're not wrong. NFTs have definitely blown up. And with that comes a lot of confusion, understandably. But at their core, NFTs, which stands for non-fungible tokens, are all about proving ownership in the digital space. Think about it like this. You can go online and find 1 million copies of the Mona Lisa, right?
True. Although sadly, my budget can only stretch to the digital copies.
Same here. But let's say you bought a digital version of the Mona Lisa, and it came with this unique, one-of-a-kind digital certificate on the blockchain, and it said, this is the original. That certificate, that's your NFT. It proves you own the real deal, not just a copy. And because it's on the blockchain, it can't be forged or duplicated.
So it's kind of like having a deed to a house, but for, digital art or music or even those virtual sneakers.
Exactly. NFTs establish scarcity and verifiable ownership in a world where, well, pretty much anything can be copied endlessly.
Okay, that actually makes a lot more sense now. But we've talked about blockchain, DeFi, NFTs. What about the career possibilities in Web3? I mean, it still feels kind of niche. Is it all just coding, or are there other ways to get involved?
That's a great question. And it's a common misconception that you have to be some kind of tech genius to work in Web3. While it's true that, blockchain developers are super in demand right now, the whole Web3 world needs a lot more than just coders to really thrive. Think about it. We're talking about building a completely new internet, a decentralized future. That takes all kinds of skills.
So what are we talking about here? Like, what kind of jobs are out there for someone who maybe, understands the basics of blockchain, but isn't necessarily writing fluent JavaScript?
You'd be surprised. We're talking marketing, design, community management, legal expertise, content creation, business development. Really, the list goes on and on. This space thrives on innovation, and that requires a diversity of talents and perspectives.
So even if someone's not a hardcore techie, you're saying they can still find a place in this decentralized future?
Absolutely. Besides a basic understanding of blockchain and Web3, those soft skills are going to be key here. Think communication, creative problem solving, adaptability. Those are crucial for navigating this landscape. It's fast-paced, it's constantly changing. Being able to learn new things quickly is essential.
Sounds like the ability to wear multiple hats and a willingness to dive into the unknown would be pretty valuable.
You got it. Web3 is all about building and experimenting, and that requires people who are passionate, resourceful, and ready to learn something new every single day.
So we've gone from those blockchain basics to a deep dive on DeFi, even explored the crazy world of NFTs. I've got to say, this Web3 space is a lot to take in.
It really is. But honestly, that's part of what makes it so fascinating. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how we think about the internet, about ownership, even about how we organize ourselves online.
It really does feel like we're standing on the edge of something totally new. But with all this talk of decentralization and, disruption, I think it's time to ask the big question. What does this actually mean for the future?
That is the million-dollar question. And if I had a crystal ball that could tell us, well, we'd be having this conversation from my virtual beach house in the metaverse, right?
Let's settle for a self-brewing coffee pot in my current apartment. But I hear you. But seriously, are we all going to be living in virtual worlds, paying for everything with Bitcoin, wearing digital couture?
It's easy to get caught up in those flashy headlines and predictions, right? But the reality is we're still in the very early stages with Web3. It's like, think back to the early days of the internet. No one could have predicted how big social media would get, or e-commerce. We had no idea.
Okay, so no metaverse real estate pitches just yet. But what are some of the potential scenarios that you're most excited about? What gets you fired up about the possibilities here?
One area that really gets me going is thinking about what this could mean for social media. Because right now, it feels like we're stuck in these walled gardens, right? Giving our data to these huge corporations that really control our whole experience. But what if your online identity, your connections, your reputation, what if it was all yours? Totally portable. You could move it across different platforms.
So less about chasing likes on whatever the next big platform is, and more about curating your own space online, choosing where you spend your time, who you connect with, on your own terms. Sign me up for that.
Web3 could really foster this shift towards smaller, community-driven platforms where people with shared interests can actually connect in ways that feel more meaningful.
Yeah, it's almost like the pendulum swinging back from mass broadcasting to something way more intimate, more focused on quality over quantity. I like that.
Me too. And it's not just about social media either. Think about what this could mean for creators, musicians, artists, writers. Imagine if they could bypass those traditional gatekeepers, the record labels, the publishers, whoever, and use blockchain to directly connect with their audience and get fairly compensated for their work.
It's like going from this system built on scarcity and gatekeepers to one of abundance and direct connection. That's powerful.
It really is. And it goes beyond just the money, too. It's about creators having more control over their own work, building stronger relationships with their fans, and ultimately just sharing their art on their own terms.
This has been eye-opening, to say the least. Before we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with today? What's the most important thing to remember about Web3?
I think the most crucial thing to remember is that Web3 is way more than just a technology. It's a movement. It's about questioning how things are done, exploring new possibilities, and ultimately building a future for the internet that's more open, more equitable, and more user-centric.
I love that. It's not about just blindly following every new trend or buzzword, but about being informed, being engaged, and being empowered to help shape this new frontier in a way that aligns with our values. So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought to ponder. If you could design your ideal online experience, what would a truly decentralized, user-centric internet look like to you? What would you change? What would you create? Keep those questions in mind as you're navigating this crazy, ever-evolving world of Web3. And remember, the future isn't written yet, and you have a hand in shaping it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Web3. Be sure to check out the show notes. We've got tons of resources and information there if you want to keep exploring. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and most importantly, stay curious.